This screencast is to support this lesson on the topic of dilemmas and with the functional language of giving advice. The reference for the book is Straightforward Intermediate and the publisher is Macmillan. This is lesson 7D. Okay, so let's have a look at the materials. We've got this page from the course unit, which has a nice speaking and reading activity, and then some listening to bring out the functional language and some practice activities. Okay, so first of all, we need to elicit dilemmas. Do students know what this means? You could have a simple picture of a person with a thoughtful look on their face, perhaps a thought bubble coming from their head with a question mark, and from that, elicit perhaps problem, and maybe they'll come up with the word dilemma. You might want to give them the first letter if they don't, and then we need to concept check that. A dilemma is usually a difficult choice that someone has to make between two or more things, isn't it? So, make sure they've understood that before moving forward to speaking exercise 1. So here we have 3 situations that the students need to read and decide who has the most difficult decision to make. So we've got Lynn, Steve, Gabita and Sandy, who all have a dilemma. Set the question, ask the students to read quickly. They don't need to understand every word, and then get them to check together before nominating and getting the answers. Once they've done that, they can have a little bit of discussion with exercise 2. 2 questions. What advice would you give the 3 people in exercise 1? And have you ever had an important or difficult decision to make? What was it? Next, they've got a listening exercise to do. So they listen to a dialogue between Lynn from speaking exercise 1 and Carl, a close friend, and answer 3 questions. What's Lynn's main worry? What does Carl suggest? And what does she think about his suggestions? So you might want to just get them to recap on what they remember about Lynn's dilemma. She's engaged to be married, she's been offered a promotion, involves lots of travelling. She's not sure her husband would be happy with that though. That's her dilemma, isn't it? So just elicit some ideas, see what they remember. And then set the questions and tell them to listen to the audio. Okay. Once they've done that, get them to check together, get the answers, and make sure they can see the answers written down. So that was listening for gist. Next, they're going to listen for some specific information in exercise 2. So the second listening activity is listen to the dialogue between Lynn and Carl again, the same dialogue, and complete the sentences in column A with a phrase from column B. So you can see that in column A you've got 7 phrases, and they're all ways of starting a sentence where you're giving advice. Okay, so they need to match these 7 starts of sentences in A with the 7 second parts of sentences in B while they listen. They might need to listen more than once for this. Do the first one together, play it up to where the person says, I think you should, and pause it. Get them to talk together briefly to agree on which sentence in B the sentence in A matches with. And then you can play the rest through. After the first time they've listened, get them to check together, listen in, listen to see if they've got them all. If they haven't, play the audio again so that they can finish off the ones they didn't get the first time round. Then they check again together, then get the answers. Now you'll have 7 complete sentences which you can analyse with your students and check that they understand the meaning, form and pronunciation. So first comes meaning. Ask them to look at the sentences and elicit from them what these sentences do. So I think you should, why don't you, etc. What kind of sentences are they? You could give them a choice of 3 things. For example, are they ordering someone to do something? Are they asking for permission to do something? Or are they giving advice about doing something? If you want to use a guided discovery approach, instead of physically eliciting the answers to these questions from your students, you could simply have these questions, i.e. the choice of 3 different functions, on a slide, on a worksheet, and ask them to just briefly discuss together what they think the answer is. So meaning is pretty straightforward because there are all ways of giving advice. Next, form. What do students need to know about the form of this language? If I look at the first one, for example, I think you should, what comes after it? Is it the base verb or the infinitive without to, or is it a verb with an ing form? What about number 4? Have you thought about what comes after that? Base verb or ing form? Get the students to categorise the phrases in 2 columns, thinking about whether they're followed by a bare infinitive, base verb, infinitive without to, whatever you want to call it, or the ing form. Next, you need to address pronunciation. So as with all functional language, intonation is really important. It's the way we say it as much as how we pronounce it that gets the meaning across. So we want to drill in whole sentences here and draw students' attention to important phonological features. So for example, why don't you change the date of the wedding? Why don't you change the date of the wedding? Da 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 da. Why don't you change? Why don't you change? Listen to what happens. It all gets squashed in together at the start, doesn't it? Why don't you change the date of the wedding? And then think about sentence stress. Why don't you change the date of the wedding? Elicit from the students after you've drilled it. Where's the stress? Why don't you change the date of the wedding? Etc. Change, date, wedding. Stress is on the content words, the important words in any sentence in English. So get the students to listen out and really work on that. Have you thought about speaking to his parents first? Have you thought about speaking to his parents first? Work on that, what happens to the language, okay? So now students have learned how to give advice in different ways. They need to know how to respond when people give them advice. So exercise 3 says find the highlighted response in the audio script and match the responses to the advice 1 to 7 in exercise 2. So students can look at the audio script and you can see in red here highlighted we've got the different responses to the advice. And all they have to do is go back to the previous exercise and match these responses to the correct piece of advice. Once they've done that correctly and you've checked it, turn their attention away from the written form and drill some of the responses. Because again, they need to know how to say it with the correct stress and intonation. So for example, well, yes, maybe, but da da da. Oh no, I couldn't. I suppose I could give it a go. I hadn't thought of that, etc. Now it's time for some controlled practice. So exercise 4 asks the students to rearrange the words to make 6 pieces of advice. So they simply have to unjumble the sentences to make advice. Okay, so do the first one as an example, get the students to do number 1. And when you've checked that that's correct, they can do the others. Students then peer check, and you listen and monitor, see what's going on, see what they're getting right, see what they're still finding difficult. It should be quite straightforward. Yes, so then get some feedback and make sure that the students can see the answers. Use feedback to check any issues that are still coming up with form or pronunciation. Students can then do exercise 5. Read the advice in exercise 4 again. What do you think has happened? Why is the person giving this advice? Give them a little bit of time to discuss this together before feeding back their ideas to you. If you've got time or you want to prepare a short extension activity for fast finishers, you could prepare some sentences with incorrect form. So, for example, there's no harm in go to see him. Have you thought about ask for a promotion, etc. Now they've done the control practice, it's time for some freer practice, and this comes in the form of a role play in the book, and it's quite nice. It involves students being A and B, so you can do this in different ways. If you want to use breakout rooms, you can put group A in a breakout room and get them to prepare their part of the task together, and the same with B's, and then bring them back together to perform the role play. Otherwise, you can simply assign A and B roles to your students and give them some time to prepare the role play. The role play involves one student needing advice about a problem and the other student giving advice. So they do this one way round, and then they change roles and use different role cards to ask for and give advice. So this is an example of the student A role from page 128. So student A has won a holiday for 2 in Venice. You don't know whether to take your mother or your boyfriend, girlfriend with you. Tell your friend the following facts one by one. So for example, it says you've won a holiday for 2 in Venice. You're thinking about taking your mother with you to celebrate her 60th birthday, etc., etc. Start off with the first one. You've won a holiday for 2 in Venice. Expand on that. Ask your students to expand on it. How did they win the holiday? What did they apply to? When are they going? How do they feel? Okay, so not just reading the role cards word for word, but expanding on the ideas and giving more detail. So there's a series of sentences that student A has to read out and expand on to and adapt, obviously, because it says you have won. So they'd be saying, I've won a holiday for 2 in Venice. I can't believe it. I applied for it online and I found out yesterday that I won, for example. Okay, so they read out the sentence and then student B will give some advice on each situation. So we can see that on page 133, student B, it says, you know the following things about your friend. His or her mother loves Italy. So when student A says, I'm thinking about taking my mother, you know, student B, that their mother loves Italy. So you need to give them some advice. Oh, why don't you take your mum? She would really love it. Okay, making sure that they're using the language from the previous part of the lesson to give advice. Okay, so that needs to be visible. Do a demo. Get student A and student B to do the first one together. Use some ICQs to make sure everybody's clear on the task, and then let them do the role play. If you've got time, there are 2 more role cards that they can use to swap roles and do the exercise again. Here on page 30 and here on page 132. Make some notes while you're listening of good examples and incorrect examples of language for giving advice. And after you've done some feedback on ideas, what did they find? What solutions did they come to from their activity? What decisions did they make? you can do some post-fluency error correction. A useful lesson for the students.